Okay, so let's talk about fairy rings. Fairy rings. So do you even know what we're talking about? When I refer to a fairy ring, do you know what a fairy ring is? You've probably seen one before, just don't know what it is that you were looking at. Fairy rings are naturally occurring circles or rings on the ground that are set apart in nature. Most of the time, it is a bit of grass that grows higher than the area surrounding it. It could also be a ring of mushrooms, as they are fond of found growing with the trees, the forests, particularly with sacred trees in various Elvish and Druidic traditions. The fairy rings are signs not only of Elven Ffayrie activity within the area, but also places in which a transition into or from the other world is most likely to or has occurred. Scientists who have studied this growth tell us that there is a mycelium or fungus that grows beneath the ground that caused this abnormal growth and or the mushrooms. Terence McKenna in the Archaic Revival indicated that the original spores were probably not native to the planet Earth from the get-go. In fact, spores travel all throughout space. The appearance of mushrooms or any fungus or moss in the physical world may simply be the way in which that energy is perceived in our dimension, in our perceptions for us, but that it may actually have hidden implications at other levels of existence. Wizards actually suggest falling asleep in a fairy ring or on an elven mound to increase your chances of otherworld contact. Likewise, if you run around one 9 times, it's supposed to have the same effect. The main issue with physically transitioning into the otherworld for humans is the ability to sense the vibrations of a portal and actually manipulate that energy. An old pattern of thought that experiences only a limited spectrum of sensory perception, you have to dismiss this. There are frequencies, and we'll use subjective terms of above and below, everything that humans are capable of sensing. And if you don't know how to look for something, and if you use the wrong kind of microscope, you're going to yield poor results. You're going to have a bad time. Even a microscope requires the limited experience of an observer to be useful at all, both in the observation and the interpretation of what is being seen through a microscope. Now, ley lines have been acknowledged and studied by shamans and wizards for thousands of years. They are, in plain English, currents of obscure electromagnetic energy that some druids and elves call dragon lines, because they reflect possible flight patterns of dragons. Now, this could be a reference to the earth elemental or the Elven Ffayrie that moved about the planet prior to the existence of modern folk, or the pathways of trooping fairies. It is possible that, assuming the original Anunnaki extraterrestrial interdimensional form of the original star dragons, it is possible that the vehicles on which they used on this planet somehow were operated by, powered by, or navigated by the magnetic lines that we now find as ley lines. That's all I'm going to say about that part. Now, moving on, let's talk about elf arrows. To be hit by an elf arrow, or an arrowhead of the Elven Ffayrie, is to be called elf shot. And it's a commonly poked about topic in contemporary lore, so that just means that it's going to require more clarification and cleanup. Now, the consequence of being hit by an arrow is always some degree of fairy sight, or the ability, at the very least, to see the fae that shot you. more serious consequences could include a permanent transition to the other world, which humans would see as a death in the physical world. But the body would remain. This does not occur overnight. It would be first recognized probably as an illness that would purge the physical body so that the spirit could be free. And this is not something that can be self-induced. So, no poisoning to try and access the other world. That's all I need. Okay, so Elfshot is exceptionally peculiar in nature because it can occur intentionally or as a mistake. In fact, most of the time it is unintentional, and it's the result of a human being in the line of fire between rivals of possibly the Seelie and Unseelie courts. Because since the wounded are able to see the attacker, then the Elven Ffayrie are generally going to be cautious in allowing this to happen. However, Elfshot can also occur without the victim even really being aware of what's going on or what has occurred. And so if you're not paying attention, if you're not perceptive, then they may not see the one who shot them, may not have any clue what is actually happening there. So even if it does not produce illness, it can have other unpleasant side effects, including like energetically, like the discord within the family home or whatnot. It should be understood that these folk of the Seelie court, and mostly all creatures of Faerie who are not Unseelie or Devere, are not out to do humans harm, so long as they offer the Elven Ffayrie the respect of their own existence and observe ecological responsibility, because the actions of humans affect everything. We're all connected. It is not just for us, and it actually spreads out throughout the entire universe, our actions. So now certain taboos and rules about the use of the forest or trees, called a Silva or forest treaties, have been handed down in lore through the generations, and these are rules of using the trees and the forest without upsetting the Elven Ffayrie. So those are just some ideas about fairy rings and elf arrows. One other idea is the game of Foison, in which the members of the Fae will actually steal human food. This is not to be misinterpreted as an act of malevolence. Again, it's a game that they play, but it's said that they will eat the essence of the food, but not the food itself. And often, because when you think of them, they're usually depicted as very ethereal and thin. So they absorb only what is necessary from the food stuff. And there's reports from farmers, especially in Celtic countries, concerning the inside of their stocks being carefully eaten, leaving the outside completely intact and whole. And modern folk are going to assume that this would just be the result of some pest, but often it doesn't appear eaten, rotted, infested, or otherwise touched. So make of that what you will. The foods prepared in the Faerieland are said to be very exquisite, natural, organic, drawn from the sweet essences and nectars of nature. And there's a well-known belief that if you eat anything in your stay in the other world, you're going to be forever trapped there. Although Robert Kirk was eventually trapped in Faerieland, it was not the result of eating the food that led him there, and he had tasted it and continued to transition back and forth several times. However, he does make note that the want and memory of it lingered, as which could not be equaled or satisfied in the physical world. So, now mystical traditions also allude to leaving foodstuff for metaphysical purposes as well. Leaving out meat, milk, and sweetbread cookies. So.